Hey guys, and welcome to this year's first all-new episode of the Rank series, where I'm going to be doing the top 10 best Atari games ever made. Why am I doing that? Well, it's a new year, new haircut, and my once-a-year trip to replaying a bunch of old games that I haven't touched in a long time, which led me to pulling out the old Atari 2600 to play all the classic hits like Yard's Revenge, and Centipede, and Missile Command. I can keep going on forever. It just made me really think, It's kind of absurd how in the 80s, before Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, Atari really were the kings of the industry, to where nowadays, where they're just nothing at all. So I decided it would be a good idea to honor this company's 50-year-long legacy by ranking my favorite top 10 Atari games. But of course, deciding what counts as an Atari game is a little complicated for some people. Of course, you have the golden age of the company from 1972 to 84, known as Atari Incorporated. Then the company was restructured as Atari Games and Atari Corp in 1984 after the famous video game crash in 1983. And then later their buyout from Infogrames in the early 2000s made them become Atari SA. Some nitpickers are going to say that I should make 3 separate lists for these 3 separate forms of the company, but I really just do not care. I find it a lot more fun just do the entire list of everything Atari has ever published. And because that's everything they've ever published, that also includes games that they didn't make. More notably, this includes the Namco titles such as Dig Dug, Xevious, and Pole Position. Yeah, nowadays, people rarely contribute those games' successes with Atari, but not only is it a part of each of those games' history, but I just find it a lot more fun to add even more great games into the mix. And one thing that I know is going to upset a lot of people out there is that this list will not be including any of the fancy new Atari Recharged games. Now, I actually haven't played any of them, and it's not because I don't want to play them, it's not because I think they're going to be bad, it's just, they're all $10 a piece, it's kind of a lot of money. Do I really want to spend $80 on glorified Atari games? No, not really. To be honest, I'm really just waiting for them all to be put into a compilation package so that I can just easily buy them for a cheaper price. Hopefully when that happens, I'll just do a review of that compilation, or I'll do a separate ranked episode for each Atari Recharged game, because to be honest, I'm sure they're all great, and so I don't want to just fill the entire list with all the Recharged games and none of the originals, because that kind of defeats the point of having an Atari list. And the last 2 rules are that 1, I won't be including any compilations, because that just kind of feels like cheating, and 2, this is my own list, my own opinions. If you have an issue with any of the choices I made, then just make your own list down in the comments. This is all just fun and games, nothing too serious. But with that out of the way, let's jump straight into number 10. Now, I felt like this wouldn't be a true Atari list without at least one Atari 2600 game, so I chose Yard's Revenge to start off this list, and man, I don't even know where to start with this great game and all of its Atari 2600 flickering glory. The flickering looks okay on a modern TV, and this is just how the hardware works, but it's an absolute killer for modern emulators and capture cards, so this is going to be the only game that you're ever going to see me record off a TV screen. But this is just a fun, futuristic sci-fi shooter in which you play as a mutant descendant of the common housefly known as a Yar. You have the power to convert anything into pure energy, so you collect these energies to power up a cannon that the Yars have made, and when you're ready, you fire and kill the big guy, and play again and again and again until you lose all your lives. Also, there's this annoying homing missile trying to kill you at all times, but don't worry, as if you stay in this area right here, you're going to be immune to it. Downsides is that you can't shoot anything. That's the basic gist of it, and the game can even get more complex if you play on higher difficulties and modes such as Ultimate Yars, essentially this game's version of Halo Legendary. It's honestly kind of hard to explain why this game is so fun to someone who doesn't understand the Atari 2600 era of video games, but it's just so simplistic, so charming, so fun, yet still has a good amount of complexity to it. I mean, it is a very mathematical kind of game. You gotta be good and know the trajectory of where your line's gonna go. And I'm not gonna try to convince anyone that this is a golden age masterpiece of a game that gamers are gonna keep on playing years and years into the future, but it's still to this day just a fun, challenging experience. Plus the fact that this old-ass game gives you stuff that you still don't see in modern games, such as coming with an awesome 32-page comic book explaining the story. I mean, really for me, there's a lot to love with this one. And now that the game is so old it can be emulated on your phone browser, I've definitely been enjoying it a lot more, playing it on off time, so for sure just go try it out if you haven't done so already, as I know you're watching this video on a supercomputer that can easily emulate it. For my next pick, I'm going to be talking about the game that in my opinion really put Atari on the map and effectively started their golden age. Sure, Pong and Breakout were great hits that helped solidify the video game industry as a real concept, but the classics of the late 70s are what really turned the industry into something to start taking seriously, asteroids being one of those. The premise of the game is to simply see how far you can last as a lone spaceship in an asteroid field, shooting the asteroids smaller and smaller until they're all gone, as well as using the hyperspace button to get out of a jam. It's such a simple and classic concept, but here's a few reasons why I think the original is the best of all its future iterations. The first being that in this version, the asteroids actually get like super freaking tiny and hard to hit, which is like a core challenge of the game. Stuff like Asteroids Reloaded, or even the third iteration, Space Duel, makes the asteroids disappear way too early. Like, what's the challenge in that? And the next just being my personal preference to the overly simplistic graphics and sound, and I feel many further iterations just don't get that same classic Vector vibe right. And that too, as this game was really the first game to popularize the use of vector displays in video games, as this would be the second in what would be Atari's signature display choice. Asteroids is a simplistic, no-nonsense, iconic classic that pioneered the spaceship shooter genre, and an icon of the industry with its influence on future games. What more can I say that it's great, but not great enough to scratch an itch higher on this list. Now here's a game I bet absolutely no one was expecting. Assault, developed by Namco and published by Atari Games in 1988, is a twin-stick shooter comparable to something like Atari Inc.'s Battlezone. Now don't get me wrong, while yes the game was developed by Namco, there's no denying it has a lot of trademark Atari elements. For one, the twin-stick tank controls are literally the exact same as the pioneer of the genre, Battlezone, while being a lot more snappier to control. And the great simulated 3D graphics for the time, by having the maps be able to rotate 360 degrees forwards and backwards, gives this game a huge, awesome feel of depth. I mean, I would have killed for this game to have been remastered for the 3DS. And come on, trying to simulate 3D graphics, that's one of Atari's biggest shticks. But there's no need to ramble about the great graphics or even greater soundtrack, because the gameplay's pretty good too. It's a standard affair of shooting down enemy tanks and huge bosses by any means necessary to make it to the highest level you can without dying. But unlike most arcade games of the time, this one actually surprisingly has a true ending at stage 11. It's definitely not easy to get there, but it's great to see that there is one, and I'd totally love to put in the effort to someday beat it. I mean, yeah, the gameplay isn't groundbreaking, but it's a real well-made game with fun and difficult level design, and gives you a great feel of piloting a futuristic tank. It kinda sucks that this one isn't super well known, as it got no home ports at the time of its release, even though to me I feel it could have definitely been a hit if it was ported to something like the Super Nintendo. But alas, after all this time, apparently it finally got another official port as a part of the Arcade Archive series, so I'll totally be picking it up, and if the gameplay intrigues you, be sure to pick it up as I'm sure it won't disappoint. Centipede is a spaceship shooter released in 1981 that sold a bajillion units and became one of the first video games to have a significant female player base, alongside Pac-Man. Regardless, you have a centipede in a mushroom field that must be shot down, and as the parts of the centipede are shot, they turn into mushrooms. Shoot all parts of the centipede to keep on going. Oh, and there's also this annoying spider that gets in your way so much. If there's anything that's literally Hitler, it's this spider. Now, I actually own an arcade 1-up cabinet of this game with some beautiful side art, which is never shown off because it isn't close enough to the camera, but regardless, if you want to try out this classic for the first time, you need to make sure you play it on an authentic cabinet or something with a trackball, as playing it on anything else does not give the game justice. And speaking with that, I'm pretty sure this was the video game that popularized trackballs in video games, as it gave something different in games like Centipede, which are 100% a better way to play, due to being able to use your hand to swiftly move across in a way that joysticks could never do. But regardless, Centipede was a revolutionary classic of the golden age that's fun and simplistic. But that's kind of my biggest complaint with it. I know some people are going to disagree with me, but in a sense, it's almost a little too simplistic. Like, it just needs a little oomph, just something a little more to the gameplay. And I'm totally not foreshadowing anything. I gotta be real here, it just feels great to finally have an excuse to talk about this game. That's right, I'm not talking about the other GameCube fighter with Melee in its title that overlooks this game, because I'm talking about the real Melee. The highest rated Godzilla game of all time, and me, secretly being kind of a big Godzilla fan, I know, who could have guessed, there's no way I couldn't have put it on this list, especially as this was one of the key big releases that Atari SA first did once they got off the ground. To me, what makes this game so special is because of what I said earlier being the highest rated Godzilla game. If you know anything about Godzilla games, you know that's really not that high of a bar. I mean, this was really the first time in history that we got a genuinely good Godzilla game. Well made and done by devs that you can tell actually gave a shit about the property and understood exactly what people like me want in a Godzilla game. And that is just to beat the ever-living shit out of a wide cast of monsters and destroy buildings like it's nothing, while also giving us things I didn't know I needed, like sick-ass power-ups such as Rage, which you can use to absolutely destroy your opponent's health bar and keep all your friends running while they scream it's not fair. I cannot stress enough how vital it is to experience this game in 4 players with people who care about Godzilla as much as you do. And unlike other fighting games with steep learning curves for noobs, the simple, pick-up-and-play controls work so much in its favor. It's really not the most complex, sophisticated fighter ever made, but there's nothing wrong with that. That's not saying there's no skill in this game, as there's definitely a lot to love if you put in the hours. And come on, I'm not pointing any fingers to start any challenges, but I'm kind of frickin' good at this game. Regardless, to wrap things up before I turn this into a full review, this is one of the best 3D fighters I've ever played, and I challenge you to find me a better 3D fighter that isn't Power Stone that's better than this. Yeah, I know Atari would make 2 more sequels, but I hear Unleashed sucks, and while I hear Save the Earth is good, I hear it has some balancing changes and some kind of weird choices for mechanics. Critics didn't give it as good of a review as Melee, as it just wasn't that bigger of an upgrade, so I can just see the charm of the original. It's not perfect, and if you don't care about Godzilla, then you probably won't get much out of it, but for those who care, I hope I've inspired someone to open up a real Melee tournament, as this series really deserves a comeback. You ever played Namco/Atari's pole position before? You ever get pissed off because you keep crashing into the cars, so you wish there was a way you could just make them explode so they can get out of your way? Well, if that's you, then enter Road Rage the video game, also known as Road Blasters, the final confrontation between good and evil. Who knew that such an event would be a race down futuristic cities where you have a gun strapped to your car and you can shoot other passing cars and enemy turrets with? All trying to do so while not running out of fuel by going fast and picking up excess fuel, and collecting power-up drops that modify your car in many awesome ways. Oh, and of course, watch out for landmines. Now, I had never actually played Road Blasters before preparing for this episode, but after spending a good amount of time with it, it's no joke become one of my favorite racing games. Frankly, because it was released in this off time where technology was too far off to make great futuristic racers like Daytona USA, but already had people bored with the simulation racers of yesteryear like pole position. The solution to make the game fresh? Pull in freaking sci-fi elements, something you just don't see all these days. And the beauty of the game is that it just feels like something Mark Bustler could come up with. Like and subscribe if you understood the reference. But regardless, this game just gives you a great sense of speed, mixed in with the rush of shooting down all the enemies trying to kill you. It's really not that complicated. It's drive and shoot until you eventually run out of fuel or beat the last rally. But its simplicity is just mesmerizing and an arcade classic that I've been going back to again and again and again to since starting this review, and I can see myself still coming back to it in the years to come. And hopefully when I go to my once-a-year school trip to the nearby Blackbeards, I'll finally be able to play the Road Blasters cabinet with a new appreciation for it. You know, if it's actually in working order and not taken out at that point. Missile Command is nothing but a golden age coin-op classic, and for the longest time was probably my favorite Atari game. For those who don't know, you take control of 3 missile bases, each with a limited number of missiles, as you defend 6 cities from enemy nukes and bonus enemies. Keep playing until all your cities are destroyed. And I know for what seems like every game on this list, I've said, this has an easy to learn concept with super difficult gameplay, but I really mean it for this one. This game is just so immensely fast-paced with how many missiles start flying in the later levels, which is why it's so essential why this game is played with a trackball for such fast movement, as you're going to need some insanely fast reaction timing if you want to get anywhere far. But I don't just love it because it's tough as balls, it's also just fun due to it being released in 1980, a year in which a potential breakout of nuclear warfare was a genuine concern for some American citizens. It's probably one of the only video games to turn such a dark, real-world topic into something that's so fun and addicting. But with that, there's really not much else to say. I'm sure most of the people watching this have already played it, and if you haven't, then just go play it right now, as it's just such a total icon and a gaming essential that everyone who considers themselves a true gamer needs to play at least once to get where all the praise comes from. Tough as nails and endlessly replayable, Missile Command represents everything so great about the early 80s arcade scene, which is why it deserves the number 4 spot. Man, I sure do love foreshadowing! Millipede is the 1982 sequel to the 1981 arcade hit Centipede, which we talked about earlier. And as you can tell by its high inclusion on the list, long story short, it's basically just the objectively better version of Centipede to the point where it practically makes the first game obsolete. First, the game solves the #1 biggest issue I had with Centipede, and that's that spiders aren't as much of a dick as they were in the first game. They're still a dick, don't get me wrong, but the fact that they're just a bit slower and have a bigger hitbox is just such a welcome inclusion. In fact, everything has a bigger hitbox, which is absolutely great, as it just fixes a small issue in the first game on how the sprites felt so small to the point where it's kind of hard to make precise hits at times. And hey, bigger hitboxes also mean bigger and more detailed sprites, which also means a well-appreciated graphical upgrade, while still not losing any of the original's charm. Dynamite packets are also a welcome inclusion, and are super satisfying if you get a direct hit on the Millipede. There's a plethora of new enemies with different patterns to get rid of, and even these awesome bonus rounds you have to avoid being killed by a swarm of bugs. But because there's tons of all new enemies, means the game gets a lot more frantic than Centipede a lot more quickly, which some view as a downside, but I actually surprisingly prefer it. I mean, this game is just so batshit insane at times to the point where I can do nothing but just have a huge grin on my face. And yeah, I get that Centipede gets more respect for being the first, and a lot of people prefer the more simplistic challenge of the original, to the point where I feel this game almost gets overlooked by many. But better graphics, bigger sprites, and a lot to shake up the gameplay, while still retaining the charm of the original, makes this, for me, an objectively better game. Still though, even at its core, Centipede is still Centipede, which is great, which is why I feel obligated to still give it a spot on this list, even if I prefer Millipede. Now to talk about the game I'm sure you Atari fans have all been waiting for. 1981's Tempest, aka a damned masterpiece. I could honestly ramble about how much I love this game all day, so let me try to break down why I love this game so much without taking an hour. For one, being such a unique premise of being a tube shooter, in which you play as a claw that moves around a set area as enemies crawl from above to kill you. The premise was actually inspired by a nightmare the game's creator had, in which demons came up tunnels closely trying to kill him. And that's exactly why this is one of the most unique shooters ever made, and why nothing in the genre has ever come close to rivaling it in terms of originality. That kind of uniqueness can only come from something so personal, like a nightmare. But that's not all the game was known for, as this game was a big innovator, being the first vector game with a color monitor, one of the first to create a giant sense of 3D space, and one of the first to have multiple levels. Yep, instead of the same repeating screen over and over like most games of the era, Tempest had a whopping 16 levels, and even when you beat them, you got to replay them in all new ways with all new enemies. But really, who even cares about all that? Because to be real with you, the most important part of this game is just that it's plain fun. It's so much fun. This is really, in my opinion, the definition of great game design. What's so great about it is its easy pick-up-and-play mentality rocked by its surprising complexity, such as its puzzle elements in later levels, or the mathematical nature of trying to get an angle with the most frames to kill enemy crawlers. Bear in mind that this game is not easy. You will die a lot. Your reflexes will be tested by its incredibly fast pace, and don't be surprised if this game easily gets you in the zone, which you just can't put down its addictive nature. To wrap things up, Tempest is a graphical and gameplay achievement of the golden age of arcades, made back in an era where developers had one single unified vision of their game, never interrupted by company politics, back when games weren't afraid to take players to their absolute limits. In my opinion, this game just represents the true foundations that video games were built upon in the first place. So if I seem to rave and love this game so much, it seems kinda absurd that there could be a game better than it. So, what could it possibly be? Come on, I'm sorry, but I know I just had to do it. 2003's Ikaruga, developed by Treasure and published by Atari SA, is without a doubt one of the best video games of all time, while also being one of my personal favorite games that has practically defined my life.
I know, I'm a little biased, and I know it's weird having the #1 spot not be a Golden Age Atari game, and while I was so tempted to put Tempest higher, I just couldn't do it. But for those who have never played it, basically the whole concept of the game is that there are two types of ammunition that are shot, black bullets and white bullets. And your ship can change polarities to absorb whatever kind of bullet it fits into this energy meter to let out a special attack. And that's not even mentioning the chain mechanic, where if you shoot 3 of any enemy type in a row, that counts as a chain, and you're encouraged to get as many chains in a row to get a ton of bonus points in a classic 80s style leaderboard system, that back in the day even had an official website where you could post your high scores. But like practically every other thing on this list, you know for a fact this game is so difficult. Never unfair, but always challenging in a classic bullet hell affair, mixed in with the great level design and awesome bosses that Treasure are known for. Not even mentioning how fun it is in 2-player. And the other signature Treasure aspect of the game is just its awesome story and themes. Really a game that makes you think about our legacy after death, and something that really helps relate to that is its kick-ass vintage Japanese art style. And I mean, without talking about it for hours, it's just everything that makes a great video game. There's really no downright negative aspects of the game, other than it maybe being a little too short, but it makes up for that with its infinite replayability, trying to get better and better at it again and again, mastering its oozing layered complexity, just like the games that inspired it. Especially with it being a spaceship shooter that's tough as hell and has puzzle elements. And that's really what makes it so endearing to me, the fact that it was published by Atari, because it really feels like the evolution of the spaceship shooter genre created by the companies that pioneered said genre, like Atari. To me, this really feels like the end of that evolution. The end of an era where shoot-em-ups were kind of mainstream, where you could just walk into a game store and see shoot-em-ups on the shelves for consoles like the Dreamcast and GameCube. And I mean, come on, I challenge anyone to find a shoot-em-up released post-Ikaruga's 2003 North American release that's been better than this game, or has at least gotten the same kind of mainstream spotlight, because I can't remember anything, which is why I think a new game in this series is so vital. Because if there's anything that gaming needs now, it's for Treasure to reclaim their place in the eyes of the mainstream to show them how a real challenging video game is made. And with potential talks and rumors of a sequel, it would just be a dream come true for that to be a reality.
And so, that's the episode. It's going to be a lot of fun seeing all the differing lists down in the comments, because there are so many games that I almost included on the list, but just didn't make the cut. Most notably, Tempest 2000. I feel like I'm legally obligated to state that game's existence, or else I'm going to get screamed at. I do like Tempest 2000. It is a good game, but not nearly as much as the original. I just think the original is a much better game. In fact, I kind of have very strong opinions on the rest of the Tempest franchise, 2000, 3000, and 4000, that I honestly wouldn't mind making a separate video just on those games if people are inclined and they care enough for me to talk about those games. But yeah, not every Ranked Series episode is going to be a big, sprawling episode with a huge multimedia franchise. Some of them are going to be a lot smaller like this, and so it's just going to be good to get some opinions out, you know? So, without that, stay tuned for next week's podcast. It's going to be a great one. And yeah, just stay strapped in for new Ranked Series episodes. And of course, stay tuned for whatever I have next.